Welcome back to another Updates with the City Manager. I'm Shelby Quinlivan, your Communications Manager, and this is Jim Palenick, your City Manager. And we haven't been here in a little bit, but we are back, and we have a lot to talk about because we've had a lot of meetings lately.
We have, yes.
A lot of special meetings
Yes.
that were not originally on this calendar, but that is because we have some ARPA money and ARPA funds that were distributed from the federal government. And it is a multi-year budget planning process, and we want to make sure that those funds are distributed. And so we have been finalizing that budget. So if you could kind of recap for the community as to what ARPA funds are, what that means for Middletown, and where we're headed as far as those funds are concerned.
Sure. ARPA is an acronym for American Rescue Plan Act. It was the federal legislation that most people first heard about as the $1.9 trillion stimulus program. And within that program, there was a significant amount of money that was allocated both to counties and to larger cities on a formula basis. The city received $18,925,000 over a 2-year period. So in May of this year, we received half of that amount. We actually have that amount of money. And then in May of next year, we'll receive the second half. Under the legislation, the city has until the conclusion of 2024, so December 31st of 2024, to fully expend all of those dollars. And the legislation itself is many hundreds of pages, and there are a lot of restrictions attached to how you can spend the money.
Right.
So one of the things when you put together a budget like this, not only are we trying to be as strategic as possible, make these funds go as far as possible on the highest priority projects, leverage as many of other resources as we can, but then do so entirely within the legislative bounds of the law.
Right.
So it has to be legal in effect for what we're spending it for. So what ARPA really wants communities to do with the funds is to spend it on things that really are dealing with the negative economic impacts of the pandemic specifically. So we are trying to make whole those people, those businesses, those circumstances that were damaged as a result of the pandemic, both physically, health-wise, economically, and that's what it's really geared for. So in that light, the city has really tried to create a plan that would say, let's be as strategic as possible. Let's use one-time money for one-time projects. Let's do them in a manner that's not just going to have a short-term impact, but that will have a very long-lasting impact. And particularly in bringing a good deal in the way more of investment to the community and recurring revenues back to the community.
Right.
And also to leverage other funds, maybe that come from other counties, from the state, from the private sector. So that's why, for the most part, most of the funding we've talked about budgeting in this case were for 3 large-scale economic development or redevelopment projects. Number one, the largest of the 3, is the riverfront redevelopment project that would be very substantial, that there's a lot of private sector commitment behind, mostly geared to hospitality, tourism, and travel, because that is an industry specifically called out within the ARPA legislation.
Right.
Number 2, also consistent with that, would be the redevelopment of the town mall that would be largely driven by a series of indoor ice sheets that would bring large amounts of sports, tourism, youth hockey, youth leagues, that type of thing to that area, really create enough demand that it would also spin off into other retail opportunities, other restaurants, multifamily housing, things of that nature. So again, we're hoping that would be as much as $100 million worth of investment as a result of that project. We're thinking the riverfront would be many, many fold beyond that, very large scale. So those, of course, are very exciting. Those take up number 1 and number 2 on the priority list. Number 3, of course, is the State Route 4 corridor and the community center. So that project is the Vale site, bringing that back with new, high-quality, mixed-use, affordable housing, as well as some retail and other amenities. acquiring, cleaning, remediating the 57 acres that used to be the paperboard site, the AK Steel site, and the Serta site,
Right.
and then fully expanding, improving dramatically the Sunny Hill Community Center, and then making other amenities that tie all those things in that corridor together. So when you take those three projects alone, the city would be looking at putting about 13.2 million of its 18.9 million to.
Yeah.
So obviously that takes up a big portion of it.
Right.
After that, we would be looking at redeveloping the Manchester site, also doing some premium pay for employees, doing some economic development grants for small business, putting money somewhat to the Visitors Bureau so that they can assist what they do. They had negative economic impacts of the pandemic. Some money for parks, particularly some bathroom improvements and some play structure stuff there. So, you know, that by the time you do all those things, for the most part, the
There
money
goes
is
your
gone.
money.
But
Right.
the way we've structured this is we're looking to leverage additional monies from Warren County,
Right.
from Butler County, from the state of Ohio, from the school district. So, you know, it is kind of a bit of a three-dimensional chess, if you will. It isn't just creating a budget that will spend these dollars,
Right.
but spend them in a way that we also attract large amounts of other dollars, so that we have this sort of resource multiplier
Right.
that says it isn't just the city's $19 million that will be spent here,
Yeah.
but as a result, multiple counties will spend a lot of money here, the state will spend a lot of money here, the private sector will spend a lot of money here, and all this investment will really turn into the kind of economic development and redevelopment that will give sustainability to the community over time and really produce a lot more in the way of recurring revenues, which is really going to be able to allow the city then to fully fund and pay for the things that we need most in the future.
Yeah.
Public safety, new facilities, you know, parks and recreation, all the kinds of things that people come to expect from its local government.
Right, absolutely. So you actually did a presentation last week
We
to
did.
council
Yep.
for a work session that was
Mhm.
special.
Yep.
And so all of this information is available.
It
at
is,
the
and
whole page.
Yep, and we would strongly encourage the public to look that up,
Right,
find
absolutely.
it, watch that presentation. There's also a budget matrix, because this is a budget that we have to approve.
Right.
It's a multi-year spending program, but effectively it's a budget that the
Mhm.
council will approve on how to spend these dollars in the most strategic way.
Right.
And it's all laid out in there. So what would happen is the council will approve an overall budget, and then as we go to spend individual component parts of that, we'll seek individual allocations at the time that we need them. And then between the time the budget is approved and by the time all of the allocations are authorized, you know, will be that sort of probably a year and a half, 2-year time frame.
Yeah. So this is not the last you're going to hear about the ARPA money. There is going to be continued updates and allocations. So this will be at council on the regular, I would assume, from now until 2024, when we have to use it by, if not sooner.
Well, and of course, in order, many of these large scale projects, you know, there'll be a couple of years in the doing of them,
Right.
so you have to fully authorize it at least a few years in advance. So I would be certain that all of the allocations will be done at least 2 years prior to the time in which they all have to be spent, because then it will take the time to be spending them appropriately.
So we are not thinking small, is what
Absolutely
is
not,
what the
and we shouldn't
end
be,
thing is, yeah.
because the point is, this is a once in a lifetime, not even once in a generation, once in a lifetime opportunity
Yeah.
that doesn't come along. You don't want to squander these dollars, and you don't want to use them for things that you have an obligation to do on your own. And it's clear, the legislation said that with clear intent. This was never designed to provide normal government services, normal investment in regular kinds of things that the city should be doing on its own. This is to make up for an extraordinary circumstance, negative economic impacts that happened as a result of a pandemic.
Right.
So you are not supposed to clearly use them for normal sorts of operations.
Yeah.
One of the questions that's come up is, can you use these to build fire stations? Because of course the city is looking at funding for new fire stations.
Absolutely, yep.
By the strict letter of the law, it is clear you absolutely cannot use ARPA funds to build a fire station. However, there is a circumstance, and some people would be looking to do this, is if you have lost revenues that you can show as a result of the negative economic impact of the pandemic,
Right.
and the city in 2020 lost revenues compared to 2019, then to the extent you have those lost revenues, you can pay yourself back for them. And in the paying of yourself back, you then can use your own general fund dollars that now you've freed up
Right.
to do something that is outside of the ARPA eligibility.
Right.
So the reason someone could say, yes, you could maybe build a fire station is you're actually using your own money, and you're doing so because you freed it up after you paid yourself back. But it's only under those circumstances that any portion of this could be used.
Yeah.
And clearly the city doesn't have anywhere near enough lost revenues to come close to paying even half of the cost of those fire stations.
Because fire stations are going to be
$16.8 million.
Yeah.
There's absolutely no question. For us to move that forward, it has to require a levy voted on by the public. That's the 1 mil levy that's been in place for 10 years.
Right.
It would continue for an additional 25 years if the voters approved that 1 mil levy extension in May of next year when that
Right.
ballot comes up.
Right.
So any way you look at it, if those fire stations are to be funded and built, that levy would be necessary. There's no way around that.
Yeah.
Now, one could argue that, is there some possibility that a small portion of that, a few years, could be cut off because maybe you could fund enough for maybe one of those fire stations at $3 million. There's some possibility that that could exist, yet to be determined. That's a policy question.
Right.
But clearly the levy would be necessary no matter what.
So stay tuned. We will have all the updates about ARPA funds at council meetings and through our YouTube station for all the council meetings that are live streamed. And then we will update you through updates with the city manager. So until next time.
Thank you.